Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions about Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. This week, it's the Hollywood Studios Year by Year. It's the Fox Film Corporation 1931. We'll be discussing A Connecticut Yankee and Surrender. As always, I'm going to take a look at some special material culled from coffee table books I've got lying around. One of the most important of those, The Hollywood Story by Joel Findler. He's got a chart of, in his opinion, the most important stars under contract to each studio in a given year, and his chart for Fox in 1931 goes like this. George O'Brien, 1 star out of a possible 3. Victor McLaglen, 2 stars. Janet Gaynor, 3 stars. Warner Baxter, 1 star. Will Rogers, 3 stars. And Spencer Tracy, 2 stars.
Who in the hell is George O'Brien?
We've seen George O'Brien recently in the Johnstown Flood, which we did in Fear and Moviegoing as part of the Silent Film Festival.
Who is he?
The main guy, the guy from Sunrise.
Oh, the Sunrise guy. Got it.
Why is Charles Farrell not here? We asked that pretty much every episode in the early 30s, but he's not here for some reason. Another little feature that we're dipping into this time around, a handy compendium of Oscars awarded to each studio in a given year. Well, in the year 1930 and 1931, there were no Oscars awarded to Fox Film Corporation. They were going through a bit of a hard time. Their beloved founder, I use beloved maybe in scare quotes, William Fox, had lost the company, and they were a little rudderless, soon to be going into receivership. Another book that we use is John Springer's Forgotten Films to Remember. Mr. Springer has a twofold process for each year, talks about movies that he believes everyone does remember, then he tells you about a few of his favorites that we should remember. Fox doesn't figure very prominently in 1931 in his book. He has one film, Bad Girl, which he lists as a film everyone remembers.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
It was an Oscar winner, so I guess that was part of his figuring. And he has no Fox films that he thinks we should remember.
Well, that's foolish, because I really enjoyed one of these films.
Yeah, me too.
Let's find out if it's the same one.
Yeah, well, we're going to start with the one that I didn't enjoy so much. And that's A Connecticut Yankee. And for that, we're going to dip into Fox Film Corporation, 1915 to 1935. And this is by Aubrey Solomon, who would go on to collaborate on the films of 20th Century Fox. Came out April 5th, 1931. A radio expert, Will Rogers, is knocked out and awakens to find himself in King Arthur's court. The story was adapted to Will Rogers' particular brand of humor, with satirical references to modern-day life, and was also updated to include helicopters, radios, and cars. This is a remake of the 1921 version. Our director is David Butler, who also brought us Just Imagine.
He did.
Written by William Conselman, adaptation and dialogue, and Mark Twain, the original novel. Cameraman Ernest Palmer. Editor Irene Mora. And our cast list, Will Rogers, William Farnham, Maureen O'Sullivan, Myrna Loy, Frank Albertson, Brandon Hurst, Mitchell Harris, and Ward Bond. It's a pretty good cast, and a very good source novel, and a great Will Rogers, and yet I did not like this movie very much.
It's infinitely better than Just Imagine, but so is almost every other movie. I think this director might have real problems. And he ended up doing a lot of Shirley Temple movies.
Those are director-proof movies.
Yeah, I was going to say pretty much ending up, I think, where his talent deserved to be. Of course, I haven't seen very many Shirley Temple movies. Maybe I will become a convert when we finally get around to them. Any coherence and charm that this movie has is provided by Will Rogers' persona. It was enough to make this not unendurable the way Just Imagine was. You know, we laughed pretty regularly throughout it, but none of that made this either a coherent or a good movie.
No. Will Rogers is always worth watching.
Unlike the comedian that was the center of Just Imagine.
Oh my god. I don't even want to think about that guy. While you're watching it, you can kind of fool yourself into thinking, yeah, it's not that bad. But when you get to the end and you realize what you've been sitting through...
Especially all of the times that Merlin sprinkles that dust around.
Oh my god.
Just stop. Just one time. Just show him on the screen not doing that. Just decide it's enough. Just have him do something else. No.
You've got Myrna Loy in this movie doing absolutely nothing.
As Morgan Le Fay, who's a great character.
Maybe you found out something about this in your research, I don't know, but some minutes were cut during reissue, and the version we saw had a 20th Century Fox logo on it, so clearly some pre-code raciness is missing, and maybe that's where Myrna shone? I don't know.
I didn't find anything on that, and all I could think of was that there were more scenes in the torture chamber. I think there were mostly naked old people, but maybe there were also naked young people in the cutscenes. That couldn't really account for 10 minutes, though.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm thinking maybe that seduction that she attempts of Will Rogers goes on much longer in the pre-code.
Or what, she takes his clothes off? Like, how far can you go with Will Rogers?
She takes her clothes off, maybe. I don't know. Somebody probably does know this.
So you've actually read the Mark Twain novel. We've now done 2 studio-era Hollywood adaptations, one with Bing Crosby.
I don't remember how much we talked about the source material in the Bing Crosby film.
Yeah, because that movie was so totally forgettable that I don't remember anything about that episode.
That was back when we were doing our time travel podcast, and we were quite long-winded. So I would guess that I did talk a fair bit about Mark Twain's novel at that time. One thing I will say is that this one starts to hint at the absolute horror of that novel right at the end, but it comes so late and it's still not played at all the way it needs to be in order to have the impact that the novel does.
Well, there are 2 major incoherencies in this movie's plot. The first is why Will Rogers, who is a radio personality who also owns a radio supply store, why his character is able to explain to these medieval people how to create modern inventions.
He's kind of an all-around inventor, it seems like, right? Because his truck that he drives around at the beginning shows that he's got many specialties. His favorite thing, or his primary activity by 1931, appears to be radio, but...
Well, he'd have to be an all-around genius, and it doesn't make any sense. There's no attempt to explain this in any way, even in a fantastical way, other than, I guess, his truck. Or van.
He's a mechanic. He's an all-around mechanic.
He can build helicopters, he can build army tanks, he can build entire factories. Yeah, he's a mechanic.
Tony Stark.
And then the other part that doesn't make any sense is this ending where the destructive nature of modern technology is shown, which in critical studies of the novel, this has been considered prescient about the destruction of World War I, which is relevant to our second film in this episode. But because Will Rogers' character is all around heroic and sympathetic, the fact that he is responsible for this wholesale bloody destruction, again, it's pretty incoherent.
And I just want to stress, it pales in comparison to what happens in the novel. I will never forget reading that novel. I had never read it until I guess I was around 30. I had figured it was kind of a light satire, and I approached it with that expectation, and it just gets apocalyptically dark. The character that Rogers is playing is known as the Boss, a brutal factory head. He goes back in time because he's in a fight with a union leader at the beginning.
He seems to be very interested in democratic reform from what I read about the novel.
Yeah, he has kind of an epiphany when he gets back to this nebulous time. We'll talk about that too, historically, what the hell is being depicted. Even in the novel, it's not an attempt at a realistic portrayal of 6th century Britain. He's a character that certainly has no love for industrial democracy when we first meet him, but when he gets back to the age of chivalry and sees the reality of the even more rapacious exploitation of the peasantry, he does kind of declare war on the crowned heads of Europe, all the nobility, and he starts to foment a revolution. And the Catholic Church declares like a fatwa on him, basically, right? Every knight is coming to kill him, and he's got like this small core of assistants, Clarence is one of them, but he's got a few other smart young men that he has around him. And together they basically wind up killing like thousands and thousands and thousands of people, but they get trapped within their own electrified field, and everyone's dead and rotting around them at the end of the novel. It's absolutely insane. I read it as part of a PhD course I was taking at Michigan State with the great Scott Michelson. It was called 9/11. The Prelude. I wound up writing on the book in relation, one, to the Civil War and the failed attempt at restructuring society during Reconstruction, and two, to the U.S. occupation of Iraq, and like Fallujah was going on while I was writing that essay. The ambivalences of the novel are intense, and you don't get any of that in the film, obviously.
Well, I'll tell you, maybe the only thing that's preserved of that at the ending is the sheer incoherence of Roger's character suddenly grabbing a gun and murdering people, even if they're supposed to be the bad guys, is so shocking. Tiny bit of what you are describing is conveyed. I don't know if that is any intention on the part of the filmmakers, however. I kept thinking this could work, even with this version of the character. This could work. This could all be some kind of nightmarish commentary on the horrors of modernity if the nightmare feel of the ending had just been emphasized more. I don't mean like what's actually happening, but stylistically, if the nightmarish feeling of the ending had just been emphasized more in the direction, the feeling of time travel movie trope of everything becoming increasingly nightmarish and out of control until finally the protagonist wakes up, as happens in this case.
Yeah, no, David Butler is not up to it.
No, he seems to just have such a big boner just for the technological anachronisms themselves. He seems to just be showing them off in themselves.
Yeah, it's really disappointing because it's not revolutionary of me to tout the brilliance of Mark Twain. But that novel is an incredible sucker punch because it ties the awakened idealism of this character. You're kind of excited by it. You're like, yeah, it's going to be great. He really is going to change things for the better, and he's going to benefit all of humanity, but it leads to nothing but mayhem.
What do you mean? Like in the present? Is that the point then? That these wonderful advances in civilization that we enjoy because of our technological brutality going to be a net loss instead of a net win?
It walks much more of a tightrope than that. We can't just not want to change things, but there's a very real possibility that in attempting to change things for the better, you're going to wind up killing everybody.
Yeah, but this is what I mean. This is what I'm saying. I think the dilemma that everyone has confronted, this is why this book is considered so prescient. The dilemma everyone has confronted in the 20th century is our technological progress outpacing our ethical progress.
But again, it's much more than that because the ethical imperative is the problem. It's not really the technology, right? It's attempting to remake society from the top down in the way that he does.
This seems like an argument against state communism.
Not necessarily.
So you're reading it as one of many readings you could do, because I said it's been read as predicting the type of warfare in World War I. You're reading it as a prediction of Stalinism?
There has to be substantial buy-in amongst a large percentage of the people that you are trying to work with to make a new society. If you don't have that, then you are going to wind up just killing everybody. That I do stand by.
There was not substantial buy-in in the novel.
No.
I thought it was just the Catholic Church that was against him.
That's everybody.
Oh, okay. I thought just the Catholic Church bigwigs were against him.
He's got a few people on his side. I think the final battle is 60 people against like 3 or maybe even 10,000 people. And they just hold them off with these electrified fences and Gatling guns. It's absolutely sick. We've probably gone on a little too long about the novel, but just to give you a flavor of what's not in the film, right? Seems to me no one has ever even attempted to adapt. You would need someone like Paul Verhoeven to tell the story properly.
Oh, that's funny though, because when we've watched other Will Rogers movies by better directors, we've said they are Verhoeven style.
I don't think John Ford would have been the guy to adapt. Much as I love Steamboat Round the Bend and Dr. Bowl, I don't think John Ford would have created a masterpiece out of Connecticut Yankee, given he wasn't a screenwriter. He would have been working with a script, something like this, and everyone that makes a movie out of this story turns it into something just jokey for the most part.
I think it was Judge Priest that we felt was kind of Verhovenish around the edges. Steamboat Round the Bend, it has some good satirical moments on race relations in America, but it's centrally about gender, I think.
Yeah.
And class.
But definitely not about violent takeover of a society and reordering of all that is. It just doesn't seem like anyone has ever gestured in the direction of adapting the novel properly.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because in our limited viewing of Will Rogers movies, we have spent a lot of time talking about him as a satirist who is more cutting and less folksy than he seems, than the general opinion of him at the time or in the present holds. You know, so it seemed like this would be a good marriage between Will Rogers and Mark Twain, but not at all.
No.
But the movie doesn't have any of that and doesn't let Will Rogers have any of that either. I was looking again at Will Rogers' extensive Wikipedia page that doesn't really barely hints at what I've been saying here. And I don't know if I've mentioned in the past this quote from David Thompson, who, when he hates something, especially when he's being a contrarian about film history or popular culture history, he really violently hates it, which has led me to violently hate David Thompson for attacking some of my faves. Anyway, this is the quote from David Thompson's A Biographical History of Film on Rogers. Rogers' philosophy was reactionary, dispiriting, and provincial, despite every affectation of bonhomie and tolerance. It scorned ideas and the people who held them. It relied on vague evolution rather than direct action. Its fixed smile concealed rigidity of opinion that Middle America need not be disturbed from its own prejudices and limitations. How do you feel about that?
No, well, clearly that's not what we see in a movie like Judge Priest. But here, maybe you could direct that criticism at it. How did this movie do at the box office? Presumably well. I think all of his movies were successful.
Wikipedia is notorious for making up different numbers in different places on their entries, but it says that the film cost $750,000 and made $1.2 million.
Right, so very successful. It's a surefire idea box office-wise, although Will Rogers is not a New England guy.
Oh God, no, not even remotely.
He's not attempting to play a Yankee.
You know, one of his best set pieces in the movie is
rope trick.
Countering a jousting tournament with his rodeo cowboy act.
Yeah, this character that he's playing bears zero resemblance to the character in the novel, right? The character in the novel is a flinty New Englander, a Republican, I'm sure. Will Rogers is very clear about being a Democrat in this film, as he always is. The figure of the New Englander, just think of going all the way back to Washington Irving, right? Like Ichabod Crane, a detestable figure throughout the rest of the country. I'm a big fan of New England, and I see much in its legacy, but he's in no way supposed to be a crowd-pleasing hero. I mean, Will Rogers just plays him the way he always plays every character, and, well, it just transforms the entire property in a way that's not dissimilar from the way others have, right? Bing Crosby kind of just makes him Bing Crosby. It seems to be a property that attracts unique and strangely amiable figures who are going to be uniquely positioned to undercut anything vicious and trenchant in the book.
I think what we've seen of Will Rogers' persona so far, between this, Judge Priest, and Steamboat Round the Bend, did we see any others?
State Fair.
Oh, and State Fair, but that's not really a Will Rogers vehicle. He's performing more of an ensemble way.
A truly amazing film.
And, you know, that's more of a crafted drama rather than specifically a vehicle. But I think what we've seen of his persona is that it is very malleable, depending how it's used by him or by others. It can be what David Thompson says, or it can be cutting, Verhovenish, progressive satire. And it all depends on the framing of it. But even when we watched Judge Priest, we said, who is this satire for? Because that's how Verhoeven got brought up. We said, who is this satire for? Who is satire ever for? If a movie can be read, the thing that makes it ironic, the thing that makes it perfect satire of the situation it's presenting is that it can be read in a completely innocuous way, in a reactionary way, or it can be read in a progressive way by the the elite that's in the know. And of course, it's enjoyable for us to read it against the grain, but does it succeed as social criticism? Well, not if that is supposed to do something to change society, because in that case, the people who are being criticized have to know it.
Obviously not, but can still make for great art. And yeah, we don't really get great art here. We should talk about some of the specifics.
Okay, well, I will say, I wonder who, does anyone listening to this podcast know an earlier example? I wonder who started the trope of what's now known as the Wizard of Oz trope, obviously used by David Lynch in Mulholland Drive. Characters from the real framing story reappearing in the dream / alternate universe body of the film or novel or what have you. I don't know of an earlier example than this. I'd hate to have to credit David Butler with that, although he certainly showed a profound interest in doubling in Just Imagine. And there was actually a clever twist on that at the end with the Merlin Doctor.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we don't know, because I haven't seen the very early versions of Wizard of Oz. Maybe they have that doubling in them already.
Yeah, it's not in the original story.
Well, no, because you need actors for that. I'm sure some silent films did this.
I'm sure you could find a way to indicate it happening in a novel, but...
Well, it wouldn't have much impact if the novel just says, hey, you look just like that person I saw in the other... reality.
So you think this trope had to have started with, or at least been done originally on the stage?
Yeah, it has to have actors playing multiple parts, or else it has no impact whatsoever.
Dave has spoken.
So yeah, we're introduced to most of the cast of characters very quickly. I really liked the beginning of this movie with Will Rogers as the MC of this little hick radio program in Connecticut.
Yeah, he's doing a much more aw shucks version of his usual self than I've seen before. Maybe because it's 1931? Is this the earliest film we've seen him in?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, maybe he develops his persona in sound film more? Who knows? I don't yet.
He has this radio station, but it's obviously not a powerful one, not bringing in a lot of advertising dollars, and he has to serve the community in many different ways, and one of the ways is to repair radios or bring giant batteries.
We always find never-ending supply of David Lynch analogies in American popular culture, but Will Rogers himself seems like another link.
David Lynch can come across as a Cracker Barrel philosopher.
Big fish, catching the big fish.
We get a call for a battery from this haunted mansion.
Which seems to be a nod to Todd Browning's Dracula coming out earlier that year.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It certainly has nothing to do with the novel, which again, the bump on the head that sends him back in time is caused by labor violence. It has nothing to do with haunted houses.
Or mad scientists.
That was pretty fun. I was quite hopeful at the beginning of this movie because, yeah, he shows up there. Yeah, it's a little silly, all the creeping around this mansion and everyone's mysterious and then dashes off. But when he meets the mad scientist whose plan is to tune into the past, I mean, that's an idea that I love. It has been done in one movie called Frequency.
You're right, it is a cool idea as a time travel vehicle.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the Twain novel either, but that's a good idea, right? Like, ooh, radio waves exist forever, and if you can somehow get onto the frequency of the past, you can hear the trial of Joan of Arc, you can hear Mark Antony and Cleopatra.
And even what actually happens with this turning out to be a radio drama that he's tuned into seems to anticipate something like War of the Worlds, and so to be an interesting commentary on radio as a medium, but there's no other commentary on radio as a medium throughout the story.
It made me think of a pretty fun program from the 40s, and I think it goes into the early 50s. You Are There. You got 1940s reporters, radio reporters, bursting into, let's say, Parliament when they're debating executing Charles I, or man on the street interviews during the shenanigans associated with the Boston Tea Party. One of the main reporters is John Charles Daly from What's My Line, the host of What's My Line later. That's what it made me think of, this recreation of the Arthurian court. That's an interesting concept to explore a tiny bit as well, right? What is King Arthur? If you time traveled back to Britain in 528, there would not be high medieval armor and social structures and knights and all of that. That has nothing to do with reality, right? I mean, that's the 12th century.
Yes, of course.
King Arthur, of course, doesn't exist at all. Nobody knows exactly what that's supposed to be, but if he was anything, he would be a Celtic ruler who carved out a little empire for himself, maybe in between the Romans leaving and the Anglo-Saxons arriving.
Do you remember if there's any indication in the novel as to why the protagonist goes back to King Arthur's court? Was he reading something about it, or why King Arthur?
You'd think I'd remember that, but I don't. There has to be something. But I don't remember. I've only read the novel once. It is one that I would like to reread. And in fact, I'm going to schedule an episode of our podcast
where we have to watch all these terrible adaptations again.
Yeah, I think it'd be worth it to read them against the novel properly. And maybe we can find some others. I know there's a silent adaptation. I don't know if it's still available or not. Maybe it will be by 2043 or whenever we get to it.
Well, obviously, there's also the Rodgers and Hart musical.
Yeah, but was that ever adapted as a film?
I don't know.
Don't think so. But yeah, this movie is very clear about why King Arthur's on his mind when he gets conked out by a suit of armor.
Yeah, we're really avoiding talking about the movie, but there just isn't that much to say. Here's, I guess, what you can say about it, and some of this from the summaries I've read is in the novel. The tropes are identical to colonial tropes of moderns encountering quote-unquote primitives.
Yeah, the Mad Doctor of Market Street.
Or King Solomon's Mines, which actually has the
Eclipse.
The eclipse trick in it. I don't know if that's stolen from Mark Twain by the author of King Solomon's Mines.
Well, they were writing around the same time, so probably not. I think actually H. Rider Haggard comes first.
Oh, yeah, so maybe Mark Twain stole it from H. Rider Haggard, and maybe Mark Twain is doing this knowingly, is borrowing those colonial tropes knowingly for his confrontation between a mythical past and modernity.
Yeah, I think so. When you read the novel, he's a Nietzschean Ubermensch in some sense, right? He thinks that everyone around him is beneath him and he needs to remake society in his image.
But in the movie, these are just ignorant, pre-scientific fools who set a series of trials that Roger's character has to pass in order to escape with his life. So it's all very familiar stuff from colonial adventure stories, which is to say colonial fantasy.
And they come off really foolishly because Merlin never does anything
except sprinkle that, whatever that dust is.
It's completely useless. Like, he is not a good charlatan. So King Arthur is a moron. He's an absolute moron.
Absolute moron. So really, Roger's character doesn't come off that well because the screenwriters haven't given him clever enough enemies or clever enough antagonists.
No, not in the least. I mean, I guess the closest thing to a real enemy is Myrna Loy, but she's barely on screen and she wastes most of her time trying to have sex with him.
Yeah, she doesn't turn out to be very clever either.
No, she's not. We got Maureen O'Sullivan in this movie for no discernible reason because she doesn't do anything.
No, not at all. Even less than Myrna Loy. Really, the fun that, as we said, makes the movie watchable is the essential anachronism of Will Rogers himself, the Will Rogers persona, conflicting with this really stupid melodrama around him.
You get the sense that he did the whole movie so that he could lasso a medieval knight.
Yeah, which really is, the highlight.
And that's why people would have went to see the movie and they would have been satisfied. They would have gone home knowing that they got exactly what they were looking for.
For their depression entertainment.
Depression indeed. Let's see what Aubrey Solomon had to say about Surrender. Came out December 6th, 1931. During World War I, at the castle of Prussian Count Reichendorf, a disfigured captain, courts Reichendorf's ward, Axel. When she is attracted to French Sergeant Dumaine, who is being held prisoner at the castle, Elbing becomes jealous. He sentences Dumaine to be executed despite Axel's pleas, but the armistice brings an end to the war. Losing his purpose in the military, Elbing commits suicide, leaving Axel free to continue her romance with Dumaine. That's the worst summary I've ever read. None of that is accurate.
I'm wondering about the name too, because Wikipedia thinks it's Ebbing. So hold on, let's let IMDb be the tiebreaker here. IMDb says Ebbing.
All right, well, on the strength of the poor summary, let's say Solomon is wrong. The director was William K. Howard. It was written by S.N. Behrman and Sonia Levien, and the novel was by Pierre Benoit. Camera, James Wong Howe. Editor, Paul Weatherwax. Music, Carly Eleanor. And the cast list: Warner Baxter, Leila Hyams, C. Aubrey Smith, Ralph Bellamy, Alexander Kirkland, William Pauly, Howard Phillips, George-André Béranger, Bodil Rossing, and Bert Hanlon.
So the only version of this we were able to find was in horrible, horrible shape, practically unwatchable, and yet I still enjoyed it a lot. This reminds me of the days of my early 20s, when most old movie viewing experiences were more like this than the Blu-ray experience. And yet still the quality shone through.
Oh yeah, it was an incredible movie, and it did remind me of watching classic films on Channel 57, the Plattsburgh, New York station, which came through on our antenna with snow all over the screen. And I taped all those movies and got used to seeing them through a haze of static and fell in love with many of them. And yeah, I thought this movie was terrific.
Yeah, it's amazing. And what is that quality that comes through even when the movies are not seen in anything remotely resembling their original condition? Well, the screenplay, and well directed by William K. Howard, a great ensemble cast with Warner Baxter as a particular standout, and Ralph Bellamy in the best performance I have ever seen Ralph Bellamy give.
I was just about to say that. Of course, Ralph Bellamy is a dependable figure of the studio age and very important part of many great films, but nothing that you see him do in His Girl Friday or The Awful Truth.
Or for that matter, Forbidden.
Right. Usually he's fairly one note, even though he's an essential note in some great symphonies. But yeah, here he's an opera all unto himself. He's really magnificent.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about this screenplay, though? Do you know who S.N. Berman is?
Well, I know the name, and I'm not sure if he may have come up before. For some reason, I feel like he has, but I could be wrong.
Well, if so, I don't remember. The architects of this screenplay are S.N. Berman and reliable, constant Fox screenwriting presence, Sonia Levien, who we've discussed before. So we'll talk about Berman. This screenplay is the product of the sensibility of Berman, a New York Jewish intellectual writer, good pals with your friend Dave Bennett Cerf, Random House publisher.
A wonderful guy.
Somerset Maugham. Although as a playwright for the stage, he was best known not for writing dramas anything like this, but for writing high comedy of the London Fontaine kind. Brilliant guy. The novel Axel by Pierre Benoit, future Nazi sympathizer.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
What does it say here on his Wikipedia page? During the Nazi occupation of France, Benoit joined the Groupe Collaboration, a pro-Nazi arts group. This led him to be arrested in September 1944. He was eventually released after 6 months, but his work remained on the blacklist of French Nazi collaborators for several years afterwards, and he was known as a political right-winger. So I'm going to say that probably the sensibility that wins out in this screenplay is S.N. Berman's. The central plot, at least, appears to be the same. Maybe the whole plot is the same. I did find some commentaries on it that I Google translated from French to English on Goodreads, which are basically calling it an erotic novel about a French prisoner, just like Warner Baxter's character, who wires this castle and falls in love with this Prussian woman that he can't have. So that's all I could find out about the plot of the novel.
Right, well, so much more is embroidered upon that plot by this film, and maybe it is all the screenplay's doing.
In any case, it is a brilliant and definitely not right-wing screenplay.
No.
The Wikipedia entry on the film says that it is widely considered to have exerted an enormous influence upon Jean Renoir's subsequent Grand Illusion. However, there's absolutely no citation supporting this.
Yeah, you can see it.
You can believe it.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Well, maybe that, if nothing else, will convince them to restore this film, if it's even possible, if the elements exist to restore it.
Oh, but who's going to advocate for that? Our podcast with our handful of 100 listeners?
No, maybe Renoir fans, if it was such an influence on Grand Illusion.
Well, it ain't happened yet, but
No.
one can hope for the future. James Wong Howe.
Exactly. There are a lot of reasons to restore this movie. You always say this, but this time I'll be the first to say it. You can tell that it must be a beautiful film if you could really see it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of care taken in the visual presentation.
Shall we start talking about the plot of the movie?
Well, we start with C. Aubrey Smith, whom we've gotten to know quite well in this podcast. He appears in so many different contexts, always as a forceful old man. And here he is exhorting his sons to go forth and destroy the French.
Yeah, when this movie started, it did seem like a bonkers, right-wing, unhinged melodrama, and I wasn't sure that I was going to enjoy it.
So he's got 4 sons, and one of them, Dietrich, is in love with and engaged to his cousin, who is played by Leila Hyams. She lives with the family, Axel, and we don't get to see him all that much at the beginning, but when we do meet him, we realize, and he tells us, he's totally different from his brothers, who were all chips off the old block and wanted to go do exactly as their father had commanded and smite their enemies.
Dave, every time we do a World War movie, I ask you this, and it's a good thing that none of it ever sticks in my head, because this way I get to ask you this on behalf of new listeners every time. Can you set, without being too long-winded, can you set the specific political context of this family and the prisoners that are being held here?
Well, these are Junkers, right? They're Prussian nobility. So Prussia was the nucleus of the German Empire. And we do get a lot of talk about the Franco-Prussian War.
We do. This is what C. Aubrey Smith was involved in, and he cannot be convinced, Colonel Blimp style, he cannot be convinced that any new war can be fought in any other way.
That was the template for him. The Prussians just rampaged across France and marched into Paris very quickly in 1871. They forced the French to sue for peace. Bismarck, who was the chancellor at that time, this was his master plan. He was going to fight a series of small, lightning-quick wars, force his opponents to their knees, and then exact his precise terms from all of his opponents. He had already done this to Austria, Hungary. All of it was leading to the proclamation of the German Empire, right? Which was, everyone was going to agree, Russia was going to absorb all these small German states that had been scattered across Middle Europe throughout that time. They did not want to take over the world, Hitler style. They just wanted to be the preeminent power in Europe. Bismarck was delighted with that and stopped there, and then the rest of his career was about maintaining this balancing act. So, yes, we've humbled the French, but now we don't want to antagonize them anymore or make things any worse, and we just have to keep playing all the different sides off of each other. And you always read that he was the only one that understood this system well enough to keep it going. And when he was kind of forced into retirement in his 80s by Wilhelm II, the Kaiser, and his cronies, these guys were morons and started to throw off the balance and make people a little bit too afraid of Germany. You know, it all kind of leads inexorably to World War I in the pretty accepted telling of the tale.
Not 10 minutes into this film, C. Aubrey Smith is rambling about the Holy Grail. What the hell is he talking about?
Well, that I don't know. Doesn't he say that they are descended from the knights that went off in search of the Holy Grail and maybe found it?
He pretty much says they brought back the Holy Grail. Maybe this was Benoit's fantasy that Berman decided to keep in just to show the extent of C. Aubrey Smith's delusions.
For all of that, he is C. Aubrey Smith, and he's kind of a lovable old man, which is interesting.
Right? Oh yeah, everybody is protective of his pathetic innocence.
And he is devastated. He loses 3 three of his sons, and that's kind of the montage.
But he's the least devastated of anyone because to the end of this movie, he thinks that they've all died for a worthy cause.
Well, yeah, but he's pretty disillusioned at the end, too, because the cause is lost, right?
Yes, at the very end. So we don't really see the impact on him. But yeah, in the end, he is disillusioned.
He comforts himself with toy soldiers and memories of these wonderful battles of his youth, where, of course, there was killing. There's always killing, but not wholesale slaughter the way you get in World War I. And he just won't accept that. He thinks that people are just being lazy, sitting around in the trenches getting blown up because they don't have gumption enough to just put an end to the war quickly and everyone can go home.
I mean, we saw a lot of talk like that in All Quiet on the Western Front.
It's a very different perspective on that kind of nonsense, but yes, you definitely see it here. So Axel, she is kind of the light of her relative's life. She's the only thing that he's got left, he says, pretty much. He does have Dietrich, but nobody's sure if he's going to come back either. And when he does come back, he's not really delivering the family mottos and credos the way you'd like.
Well, yeah, as he says when he finally shows up, such an insane irony that I should be the only one who survives since I am the only one who never believed in any of this.
A really interesting movie in the way that it positions these three guys who are all very interesting figures. They're all admirable in their own ways. Bellamy's character, the movie does, and if you listen to Aubrey Solomon, the author of the book that just gave us that sniveling paragraph, you would think that he is the villain of the film, but he absolutely isn't. There is no villain in this film. He's been blown in half. Did you even realize it was Ralph Bellamy at first?
Well, the height and the voice are hard to mistake.
Yeah.
But I did find myself, I don't think I noticed him in the cast list. It's such a different performance, like we were saying, than we've ever seen him give before, that when I looked up the movie afterwards and I was like, oh yeah, that was Ralph Bellamy. I can hardly believe it.
I recognized him immediately, but I still felt like it seemed kind of uncanny. Like, how can this be Ralph Bellamy? He's got a kind of bandage or cast over half his face, and one of his arms is gone or severely impaired. Because he can't fight on the front lines anymore, he is in charge of this prisoner camp at the estate. That's what you started to ask about.
Yes.
Prisoners of war were kept wherever they could be kept. Right? I don't know anything specific about Prussian estates being used for that purpose, but it makes sense to me.
No, I was wondering more about the composition of the prisoners. Who is the fellow who keeps beating on that tribal drum?
Allied soldiers came from the empires that they were part of, right? So you've got the British Empire and the French Empire that would have had colonial troops. We're not given enough specific detail to try to figure out who this guy is.
It feels like an unusual presentation. The composition of prisoners in a World War I film.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the people we meet, they're all French soldiers, so maybe these are French colonial soldiers, I don't know.
There's Russians, too.
There are some Russians, you're right, yeah. So it could be a hodgepodge of...
Well, I mean, we can't even really... If there were any visual cues, they were obscured by the shape of the film, but it's tonally interesting, the recurring motif of this fellow sort of mournfully singing and beating on this drum.
Here, maybe you get something of the author of the novel was a sympathizer with Germany. I mean, although that's not necessarily just because he became a Nazi doesn't necessarily mean that he would have been sympathetic to the Germans during World War I. But if he was, maybe the book makes a big deal out of the fact that these prisoners aren't being treated that horribly, and yet they say they are.
I don't know. I got the impression that this was pretty bad. The larger point that we've seen in many World War I films, a specific one we could point to, of which there are two very good versions, is Dawn Patrol. The idea being that the relationships between these people are transcending their enemy lines. I mean, that's the message that comes across in this film. Not that there's any specific sympathy from France to Germany, because C. Aubrey Smith is the one who keeps ranting about German glory, and he's a nutcase.
Yeah, but he's a Colonel Blimp style nutcase, right? Like, he thinks that war is fun and you have to beat your enemies, but you don't necessarily hate them.
Yeah, but the point is made by Dietrich. that Germany is being absolutely pointlessly decimated by this war, and that the war is absolutely pointless in itself. He couldn't more emphatically be making that point. So it's not a glorification of war, which you would expect from a Nazi sympathizer.
We're not shown like a death camp, even though the soldiers are acting like it is. But it's terrible. Of course, it's terrible inherently to be a prisoner of war, and especially in a Germany that has been blockaded and they're all starving. They're not going to be feeding their prisoners very well because they can't even feed their peasants very well. As Excel mentions, the castle's always open to you, and I wish I could do more, but I can't. We don't have anything. And that's why we're losing this war, because no supplies are getting across the Atlantic anymore.
So, yes, I guess Prussia comes off fairly well, but as I said, this movie is anything except a glorification of war.
No, it's the reverse of that, but it's not condemning any of the parties to the war. It's your standard anti-war World War I narrative. Like, this is foolishness. Everyone got into it thinking it was going to be a continuation of the glorious affairs of the past, the military pageants. It's not, and nobody understood that in time to stop it from turning into Armageddon.
The focal point of all of this is the men who love Excel.
That's right, all three of them.
Warner Baxter is... What can we say about Warner Baxter? He is just a really nice guy.
He is a very talented electrical engineer, and Aubrey Smith keeps saying it's ridiculous that they put you in the infantry. In the Prussian army, you would have been in the artillery. We would have made use of your skills. And they make use of his skills to wire the castle.
And he keeps wiring it and rewiring it just so he can get closer to Leila Hyams, which is successful. They do develop feelings for each other. Ralph Bellamy was a possible suitor, as he says, with a flashback, a possible suitor for her before his war injuries. Now he is just very bitter about his former womanizing self, basically continually humiliating himself by confessing his feelings to her, knowing that she can never reciprocate. Interestingly enough, often in 1940s movies, the woman who cannot feel anything for the disfigured soldier or the disfigured officer, is the villain, but Axel does not come off badly somehow in this.
Because there are other reasons that he wouldn't be particularly appealing to her. Even though he's a fascinating character, he doesn't bring any joy to any scene that he's in.
Well, no, it's true, he sort of pre-rejects himself.
Right. Now, he correctly senses that she's not really in love with Dietrich. And Dietrich is kind of a mystery for a lot of the film until he shows up.
And when he shows up, he's like a ghost.
He is, but this is an amazing performance too. Alexander Kirkland. He really makes an impression. But he is an ethereal figure, as you say. He no longer has any kind of investment in any part of life, but that's made him all the more observant and kind of empathetic. He does not have any reason to care for or think about the feelings of Ralph Bellamy's character at all, but he does, and he makes some very important observations about what he's been going through. It helps open the way for us as the viewers to start to take another look at the part that Ralph Bellamy is going to play in the whole thing.
So Alexander Kirkland gave very, very few film performances. He was associated with the group theater in the 1930s.
Yeah, well, he was really, really good.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you wouldn't expect a character who shows up so late in the drama and gets so little screen time would make such an impact.
And especially because he's the guy that Warner Baxter is kind of competing against while he's wooing her.
Right, and this is where everything comes to a climax, because as Leila Hyams is saying goodbye to Dietrich, who's going back to the front, they can't help but, even though she's not in love with him, she can't help but pay tribute to her love for him.
Yeah, it's the classic, she does love him. They were going to be married, they've known each other for a long time, and he is a great guy. She just doesn't happen to have intense romantic feelings for him, but she does feel quite intensely about the fact that he's clearly going to get killed when he gets sent back.
So there's a lot of embracing and even romantic-looking kissing, even though we know the truth, and Warner Baxter spies this.
Warner Baxter, who has turned down the opportunity to be exchanged and spend the rest of the war in Switzerland. And he decides, no, I'm going to stay in Prussia because I love Excel. And then to see her kissing this other man when his hopes had gotten so high, he kind of resolves to get himself killed by joining this prisoner escape plan that's doomed.
Which is what he was doing before he fell in love with her, trying to escape all the time.
Yeah.
And so he's just, as I said, Warner Baxter is in this movie just to be really, really likable, because Ebbing and Dietrich, each in their own way, are both very bitter and shattered by the war. Baxter is not. True, like he was suicidally trying to escape, but Axel has managed to give him a positive focus.
Yeah, no one is doing very well mentally in this film, and who could when you're getting toward the latter stages of one of the most destructive conflicts in human history, and you've been there on the front lines. But yes, he's the one that retains his sense of humor the most. Warner Baxter, even though he's only given 1 star by Joel W. Findler, he's an important performer at Fox in the early 30s, and he continues to star in movies throughout the rest of the decade.
So what are your favorite Warner Baxter performances then?
Well, Broadway Bill, of course. He's amazing in that movie, Frank Capra. I like him in the Crime Doctor movies. He's great in The Prisoner of Shark Island, which is a John Ford classic. Well, he's an important part of 42nd Street, right? He's the depressive director in that film. We're going to be doing that for Warner Brothers toward the end of this year, I think.
Right, the director who I always thought was supposed to be gay.
Well, he could be. I mean,
Maybe.
the way he plays him, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with that character.
What is so great about this movie? Well, is it just the fact that, I mean, it's pretty typical of the great World War I movies, that no one is presented as the enemy. What is unique about this movie? I suppose the way all of the ideas that we tend to associate with a World War I anti-war movie are conveyed as this gothic family / romantic suitor drama, right?
Yeah, it's a really unexpected approach to a lot of these themes, and all conveyed. I mean, there are no battles in this movie.
Well, there's a tiny little bit, isn't there, of battle photography with a lot of smoke and chiaroscuro. That's the part that looked like it would be most, if cleaned up, visually striking.
And that illuminated battlefield that Warner Baxter sheds electrical moonlight upon and delighting the old man. It's off to the side where people can truly contemplate the horror of what's going on.
Yeah, it feels very much like a stage play, and yet manages to still hold my interest.
It has these incredible moments for all of its actors. And of course, Ralph Bellamy at the end.
I mean, yeah, that's what I would like to talk about. What happens with Ralph Bellamy's character in this really amazing, inventive suicide scene.
Well, after he has decided to pardon Warner Baxter, again, the paragraph we read makes it sound like Ralph Bellamy was hell-bent on executing Warner Baxter, and only the armistice stops it.
No, it's the reverse.
That's right. He decides he's not going to do this.
Because otherwise it was going to be a tragic case of orders carried out right before they got the message. That's the point of finding this message.
That's right. And he does tell Excel, if I thought it would do me any good, I would have executed him. So he's not being saintly here.
But he's being non-vindictive.
Exactly. That's not really the point for Ralph Bellamy. He is a realist. Every step of the way, he is doing things that a realist would do. He is trying to run a non-satanic prisoner camp, which is still horrible, but not as bad as it could be.
He has a great moment where Leila Hyams gets angry at him for not babying C. Aubrey Smith enough, and he says, I always tell myself the truth.
That's right.
Right? So this really sets him up for the ending here. Why shouldn't I tell him the truth? I mean, yeah, obviously he does spare Warner Baxter for her sake, because he says afterwards, not very soldierly of me, or whatever he says. Anyway, all these line readings by Ralph Bellamy are just incredible. You know, he says, not very soldierly of me. I at least had that before. As if, you've taken even that from me.
Yeah.
This love I have for you has taken even that away from me.
I've started to take other things into account besides the chain of command.
So at this point, in his mind, he's no longer a man. He's no longer a good soldier. soldier, and he knows for certain, because he has basically sacrificed himself, he knows that he will never have Axel, and so now he's just going to die with dignity, because he is not the kind of man, this is not the best years of our lives, and he is not the kind of man, as he knows, because he is telling all of this to his servant, who is going to be able to survive this way in peacetime. He can face what C. Aubrey Smith cannot face, which is that he is a man who has outlived his time.
And he has a pretty amazing conversation with his servant, to whom he leaves a good amount of money.
This silent servant, and it is a trope we're very familiar with. The servant who remains devoted to his role and devoted to the man he's serving, even though, as Ebbing says, these roles aren't going to mean very much in this future,
right?
This post-war future that we're moving into. But of course, it's touching all the same, because only this servant, the only people who want him to live now, are the servant and his dog. And of course, it's more meaningful because the servant is a man and should not be in this position. It's more meaningful to him and to us that the dog wants him to live, because the dog really does love him.
Yeah.
And it's the only thing that loves him, and is maybe the only thing he really loves. We've seen the dog, kind of throughout the movie.
Yeah, it doesn't just come out of nowhere. So he finally has to throw a ball for the dog to get him out of the room so that he can...
Well, because the dog knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And he won't leave otherwise until Ralph Bellamy manages to...
Trick him,
make him think a game is going on.
Oh, maybe he's cheering up. Let's play ball.
And then shuts the door, and the dog hears the shot, and then goes back to the door and starts scratching on it.
Yeah, I mean, the dog has this intensely emotional scene. Of course, all of that is really the director and the camera doing this. I mean, the dog is, I'm sure, a wonderful dog, but the impact of it is due to the incredible design of the film.
Yeah, I mean, because we can read the feelings of the dog as though it is a character.
That's right. It does leave the way clear for Warner Baxter and Leila Hyams to live happily ever after. We don't necessarily find out whether Dietrich gets killed or not, but you kind of assume that he will, and he's half hoping for it because he doesn't want to be part of this world anymore either.
Yeah, two opposite men, and they have a great scene together too.
They do.
Like, that's a really fantastic whole literary scene where so much becomes clear when Dietrich comes back and they have all of these interactions. So much thematically becomes clear about the movie at that point. So these are two opposite men, but neither of them can continue to live in this post-war world. Dietrich, because
he's too sensitive.
Well, because he thinks that the sensitive values are not enough. We just did this whole Woody Allen movies series, the Farrow and Allen movies, and we kept talking about this theme. Well, Dietrich has lived for aesthetic values, and now what he's saying to Axel, the exchange that they have that's so fascinating, is he's saying to her, these things are not enough to live for in a completely meaningless world in which all of the old values have been destroyed and proven false. And she's saying, no, actually, in a world where all of the old values have been destroyed and proven false, you can at least hope that your values are the very things that are going to mean the most. They're going to be the only meaning.
Yeah, music and literature and the arts.
But he can't see it that way. He's perhaps too sensitive, or perhaps has just faced too much on the battlefields, right? But yeah, so he and Bellamy are these two complete opposite figures who talk about how much they hate each other.
Dietrich says, you don't even have to pretend to like Ebbing because he assumes you hate him.
Yeah, right? I mean, they hate each other, but they kind of still have some kind of respect for each other in that hatred.
Yeah.
Or at least Dietrich does toward Ebbing.
Yeah, well, Dietrich, of course, is a more expansive mind. Yeah, they share something. I like the way you put it. There is a symmetry in the way these two, like all sides of the spectrum, have been destroyed by this war.
Why is Warner Baxter okay then?
He's just a happy-go-lucky guy. Although even he can be dragged into very morose morose, self-destructive decisions, but he can snap himself out of it with the help of Leila Hyams. I mean, that's the main thing. She's really good in the movie, too. I liked her.
Yeah, her cadences weren't the best compared to the other actors, but her emotions were always believable, which was more important.
And she's in some pretty important movies, right? I mean, she's in Freaks and she's in Island of Lost Souls. Those are the two I know her from. And her career seems to end in the mid-30s.
She retired, and she was cool with that, apparently.
She can take a lot of pride in the movies that she was part of, and I think Surrender should be on that list of important movies.
Yeah, well worth watching, despite the terrible condition that it's in.
And we can all hope for something better.
Just like Dietrich, if he survives.
That's right. All right, next week on the podcast, we return to Gloria Graham, the actress Air Review. We will be discussing A Woman's Secret, which is a longtime favorite of mine, pairing Gloria Graham up with Nicholas Ray, the director, for the first time, and Roughshod, which is a movie I have never seen, so we'll find out what that's all about.